Okay, so it's 1 minute after 5 o'clock, so we're going to get started. My name is Kristin Tinelli. I'm one of the authors of the two books that we're going to be celebrating today. I am also a professor of music in the Music, Sound, and Media Cultures area of the Arts, Culture, and Media program at the University of Groningen. And this event is a co-presentation of the Music Matters series at the University of Groningen and the IASPM Benelux chapter's Pop Talk series. So I'm also the secretary of IASPM Benelux, and so I welcome you on behalf of both of these organizations. We're going to be celebrating my book, Voices Found, in the second hour, and in the first hour, we're going to be celebrating Remixing European Jazz Culture by Kristin McGee. So I'm going to give her the floor now. One more thing, actually, before Kristin takes over, we are recording this meeting. So if you don't want it publicly known that you're here, please leave the meeting or shut your camera off.
Okay, thanks so much. Just want to check to see if you can actually see the slides that I posted, because I can't see them. It looks good? Okay. Yeah. So let me know if that's going okay. So thanks, Chris, for introducing everything. Really excited to be here today. I thought we'd just quickly go over the schedule so you get a sense of what to anticipate in the upcoming 2 hours. So I'm going to give a brief introduction to the book, and then we're going to do some listening with Jazzanova's Stefan Leisering. After that, we have a pre-recorded / live presentation of saxophonist and DJ Susanna Alt, who's made a living room recording for us today. And then we will have a response by Dr. Fabian Holt, followed by a discussion of any of the topics or ideas presented in the first hour. And then we'll move to the second hour of Chris's book, Voices Found. So that's the basic layout for today's presentations and talks. I'm really excited to be here with you all. And thanks for showing up. So I'm going to just go ahead and jump into a short introduction to the book. And in this introduction, I'd like to highlight the book's focus on a European jazz mutually engaged with popular culture, electronic music, and contemporary jazz developments since the 1990s. This project began in Amsterdam in 2008 and involved conversations with instrumentalists, dancers, programmers, and record owners from 6 countries. Trips were made intermittently for over a decade to several cities to visit concerts and festivals, especially within Northern Europe. Rather than introduce every chapter, I'll feature 3 contrasting cases: the Norwegian label Jazzland Records, the Harong swing dance community, and the Birmingham-based electro swing group Electric Swing Circus. These cases hopefully reflect the range of genres, practices, and media contained within the book. Ultimately, the book aims to intervene in canonical presentations of American and European jazz histories to incorporate modern phenomena and impulses through the role of the remix, the sobriquet of recent decades. Remix highlights the process-oriented ethos of this culture. It aims to upstage teleological lineages to argue for jazz's continued vitality in decades when jazz reunited with pop culture and embraced its corporeal foundations. It further prioritizes the open-ended participatory impulses of digital media. So here's Act 1. Beyond the geographically bound reputation of Scandinavian jazz codified within the term Nordic tone, an aesthetic ideal taking shape during the 1960s, Fabian Holt once argued that jazz's inclusion with expanding notions of cultural heritage facilitated new forms of social and cultural belonging within Europe's national borders. These forms connected Denmark, Sweden, and Norway's commitment to jazz in the post-war period, and positioned Nordic jazz against the individuality, instability, and dominance of the growing American media industry. While the Nordic tone acquired symbolic meaning through the adaptation of local folk songs, which highlighted the regional and sometimes nationalistic undertones of Norwegian jazz, by the mid-1990s, younger artists sought to develop beyond the ethnic jazz of their famous predecessors. Acculturated by transnational flows of pop and electronica, Bugge Wesseltoft's Jazzland Records incorporated the timbres and textures of urban popular music into cosmopolitan, polygeneric projects. Yet by the end of the 20th century, The concept of the Nordic tone had accrued international cachet. It was now used quite broadly to depict a variety of open-minded Scandinavian musicians experimenting across genres in an expressive tone. Eventually, this new generation acquired peers across the Atlantic and North Sea, adapting hardware-driven techniques such as sampling, electronic sound generation, and computer drum programming. Both world and electronic dance music would emerge as prominent sources for positioning an expanded sense of place within the internationally mediated markets of European jazz. While some lauded the progressive and refreshing modernizing of jazz within contemporary technological innovations, purists critiqued the sampling of older recordings within hybrid projects, claiming the exploitation of non-white artists from earlier decades. Yet others embraced the expansion of repertoires outside the dominance of the US to incorporate musical styles from the global South. In the mid-1990s, acid jazz became an important precursor to new ways of performing, recording, and experiencing music. This style situated the DJ and sound artist prominently alongside the improvising instrumentalist and vocalist in the club setting. Within this evolving milieu, in 1996, Wesseltoft released his first Jazzland recording, A New Conception of Jazz, which discursively challenged the regionalism of the so-called Nordic tone, but also presented an implied performative critique of the growing conservatism of mainstream American jazz. Retrospectively, Wesseltoft's Jazzland artists and their movements across Europe, Japan, and North America indicated a growing international alliance of jazz improvisation, electronic music, and club dance culture. The UK jazz dance scene constituted part of this grassroots-based jazz and DJ dance partnership. Some critics began to refer to this new music's growing popularity as simply new jazz. Longtime collaborator Sitzel Andresen is first featured with Bugge on the opening track, Somewhere in Between, on his confidently titled New Conception of Jazz. So if you can all click over to the chat section now, I'd like you to go to the first link. It's called Bugge Wesseltoft, Somewhere in Between. And if you can all join me to listen to from 3:30 to 4:30 together. We figured this was the best way to get the highest quality rather than me playing it with bad quality from my computer. So just go ahead and switch on that link and we'll just listen to that first minute together. I hope you got to listen to a little bit. You can always check out the full track later on. I hope you do. It's a really interesting track that builds gradually. And the main idea is to hear both the kind of looping that would sometimes happen live in the recording process, or sorry, live during the performance process. And in the studio, those sequences would be looped and then improvised. So you can kind of hear this expanding. And this is maybe now a kind of typical sound of the late 1990s, but first really pioneered by Jazzland Records. All right. Let me get back to my slides here. Yes. And this featured these musicians. I won't read them all just for time's sake, but you can get a sense of the variety of types of musicians that are performing in these early Jazzland recordings. Here began Wesseltoft and Jazzland's eclecticism, which combined a technological exploration with perpetual remixing of the group's repertoire. This eclecticism epitomizes the Jazzland aesthetic, one that veers in and out of jazz practice, but embraces both national and international influences. By integrating musics reflecting Norway's traditional heritage, Jazzland and Bugge's projects in particular animate and update the Nordic tone, which catapulted Norwegian jazz into the international jazz circuit 4 decades ago. Okay, now we go to the part 2, my second case, Harong's swing dance community. Many of the Swedish jazz and Lindy dancers share a background. Sorry, that's the wrong place. Let me go back. Now let's explore how the combined worlds of Harong Lindy Hop Dance Camp in Sweden, with its preservationist values of knowledge dissemination and the more diffuse and unpredictable sphere of online media, have engendered survival technologies for the community's competitive dancers. In the book, I argue how Harong's dancers contribute to an embodied, intermediated, affective community, one which aims to preserve a purist jazz dance sensibility in physical spaces while also establishing media power via the online circulation of films connecting the growing transnational swing dance community. In this ecosystem, these dancers variously acquire prestige, visibility, and income in a precarious economy. Moreover, as a result of the combined conservationist commitment to the earlier legacy of the old-timers, with a more flexible adaptation of performance routes, dance styles, and media promotion tactics, the Lindy Hop scene in Sweden has positioned itself as the leading dance community while able to maintain connections to the perceived authentic while mythologized roots of this Harlem-based jazz dance. And so now I just have some photos to kind of give you a sense of what the camp looks like. Here's the outside of the camp. It used to be a kind of gathering meeting place for workers in an earlier decade. It's sort of a school-like formation. Here's one of the earlier so-called old-timers who used to come to the camp. She's no longer living, and she taught dances, and she's one of the original Whitey Lindy Hoppers. So there's this kind of tribute to her throughout the camp that you'll see, as well as her presence in pictures such as this New York Times from 2018. You can see her sitting in the chair where she is, giving instruction to the dancers, learning particular routines. And here is the daily meeting chorus line of the Harong dance camp, and you can see them every other night in performances in the nightly meetings after the day of lessons in dancing. Many of Sweden's jazz and Lindy dancers share a background in municipal dance societies. Others develop later in their lives after seeing performances in American films, through social dancing, or through performances of local groups such as Stockholm's Harlem Hotshots. While the Lindy Hop has evolved into a variety of modern forms in the 21st century, the goal of the Hotshots is to preserve the dance as it was performed in Harlem during the golden age of swing. Indeed, their website promotes a preservationist view of the dance, and I'll show you a quotation from their website here to give you a sense of that. You can just read it to yourself. I won't read it out loud. Okay, so the ideology of the Harlem Hotshots evolved directly from the founders of the first revival in the 1980s, the Rhythm Hotshots, who labored to revitalize the dance at a moment when some feared its disappearance. Harong founder Leonard Westerlund and others created this group to research the Harlem origins of the dance and preserve it. This goal has remained consistent with the newer iteration of the Harlem Hotshots. Even today, many of the projects are driven largely by artistic goals. Hotshots dancer Richard Ekstrand reinforced the aesthetic goals of the group's particular projects, such as filming a dance sequence in a single long shot, as they might have done in the 1930s. This artistic exercise helped to foreground the dance, especially in light of the many digital editing techniques currently used to promote popular dance. By recreating these older dances, as well as presentational technologies, the troupe attempts to authentically engage with and represents the jazz dance past, while exploiting digital networks to promote their performed present. So now we will go to a short video, and then I think I'll actually not show my third case today because just with all these technical things, it always takes slightly longer than you expect. So now I'd like you to go to the second link, and I'd like you to start at the first minute and watch about a minute of the dance that's performed in this video of the Harlem Hotshots. Okay, did you get to check that out a little bit? It's obviously meant to look like a kind of vintage film. You can see all of the choreography is deeply inspired by the Harlem dancers of the 1930s and 40s. And in this film, each dancer offers their own interpretations of dances inspired by the Whiteys, Lindy Hoppers, including Frankie Manning, Esther Washington, Leon James, and Norma Miller. These include a number of really fast swing outs, Charleston steps, aerials, and applejacks, all staples of the jazz and swing era. By presenting young third-wave revivalist dancers reenacting Harlem-based steps as first mediated in Hollywood or New York studios, the troupe draws attention to an under-recognized corpus of jazz media from the last century. Furthermore, they engage in practice-based research as they dance to better understand the aesthetic, corporeal, and technological limitations of the intersecting dance and film worlds of the 1930s and 40s. At Harong, while the revival of the revival forges ahead in our current moment of intensified virality, environmental crisis, and mediated social debate, new dancers prepare themselves for an ongoing and deeply embodied engagement with the jazz dance past. While a critical self-reflection continues to occupy a place within the time machine ethos of Harong, the next generation takes up digital networks to adapt new survival technologies amidst the challenges presented by the changing structures within the broader European jazz industry. So I hope that these brief vignettes have piqued your curiosity to explore the diversity of European jazz culture in the age of digitalization, transnationalism, and aesthetic cosmopolitanism, as I've tried to present it in Remixing European Jazz Culture. Thanks a lot for your attention. All right, so now we have some fun and interactive elements that we're going to move towards. Susanna Altz, welcome. So nice to see you, and thanks for joining us today at the book launch. And so also you, I had the great honor of, I think it was maybe almost 10 years ago for the first time that I met you and interviewed you as you were the performing saxophonist with, at that time, the collective Wicked Jazz Sounds.
Yeah.
And you all had a weekly night that you played there in Amsterdam. And that's where I saw you perform for the first time. I was just blown away by your improvisational prowess. And since then, you've developed many groups on your own, and it appears that you're also DJing and combining interesting electronic music soundscapes with your own saxophone improvisations. And today, we have the treat of hearing a performance that you actually, I think, made today in your living room.
Yes.
So what can we do? Would you like to introduce it, and then we listen to about 6 or 7 minutes of it, or
Yeah.
would you like to just play it?
Just a little bit about it in advance. I'm a jazz saxophone player, and I started after playing a long time with alongside DJs. I also started DJing because I also wanted to play my own tunes. And sometimes DJs they are so in their own space, and they have their own ideas that they would not play my tunes. And I was a little bit like, come on, guys. And then so I just figured out I had to DJ myself. So I just started a little bit DJing, and then someone asked me, "Oh, are you also DJing?" I'm like, yes, but I didn't have so many skills yet. So, but I just took the gig, and so I had to DJ as well. So since 5 years, I'm also a DJ. The tunes, 3 of the 4 tunes in the video are remixes by my last album, which is, it was kind of a big project. It's called Saxify, and it featured many of my favorite musicians I worked with, but also admired. So some of my heroes and some of my friends, which are also heroes. And I wanted to bring it to the dance floor also, because the funk album, it's a little bit more listening music, and it's a bit more relaxed, and so the remixes blend in a little bit more with the DJ music. So, but I chose not the very housey ones for today, but they're a little bit more down tempo. So. Actually, the first remix is I think they are from Groningen, a rock and roller sound system. Also, the names of the remixes are in the link of YouTube. So I hope you enjoy it. And it's just me jamming along on a Wednesday afternoon in rainy Amsterdam. So.
Okay, thanks so much. I got through about 6 minutes, and that was really cool to see, and also a bit disorienting, because here you are in person, and here's the video on YouTube. So it's very much reflective of the topics of the book, and I really enjoyed seeing that. I'm just impressed how you're orienting your grooves, you're making the transitions. Can you just briefly talk about, what it's like to perform with the DJ, and then we come back to Stefan, so he can also introduce. But just one question for you, Susanna. What are some of the challenges that you find performing with electronic music and DJs versus just playing with acoustic instrumentalists? Maybe that's just one question for you.
Well, it really depends. I think there's not so much difference. As the first thing is, there's only good music and bad music, and the challenge is, well, it's a little bit more technical. So you cannot ask the CD player, what shall we play next? So you have to just make up your mind and do it by yourself. And so in the beginning, I really had to fight against the technical things, because I'm a really analog jazz musician who was afraid of knobs. So that was basically it. So when I started playing with DJs, that they had all the technical skills. So I did not have to think about anything. So, and just play what I felt. And now I had to think about the sound and what to play and how to keep it interesting and things like that. So it's a little bit different.
Thank you so much. That was so great, Susanna. All right. And so now I would like to invite Stefan Leisering just to show us that you're here. Maybe turn off your mic. Hello.
Yes.
Oh,
Here
wonderful.
Hello
Great.
from Berlin.
Hello. Welcome.
You too.
Welcome, Stefan. Thanks so much for being here today. You are the well-known producer of Jazzanova and so many other projects. And I had the privilege of meeting you in Berlin a few years ago.
Yes.
And sharing some conversations with you about how you produce and your approach towards the collective, the DJ producer-led collective of Jazzanova. And so when we were discussing today, we thought it'd be fun if we could maybe listen to one of the tracks that you've remixed, but perhaps it'd be great if you could first briefly introduce it, and then we can all listen to some of it.
Okay, so it was one of the mixes we did a little later, not in the early years, and we were asked to do a remix for Hugh Masekela, who I actually really admired. And I also saw him live in Cape Town, and it was a great honor to do the remix for him. And long story short, I don't go into details, but we really enjoyed working on that track Stimula, which is also one of the more important tracks by Hugh Masekela, because it has a lot of his autobiography in the song, like where he's from. And maybe we can listen to it and then talk a little about it.
Sounds great.
I was, how to say, very proud being asked to do this remix for him. Yeah.
Yeah, quite an honor, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's say everyone move to or I think the link will come again because now we've got so many links. Shall I do that, or Chris, do you want to do that? Here, I'll do it. Let's listen to the first 5 minutes of Stimula, and here's the link just again. Stefan, so the question was if you can tell us how you composed this track, and just tell us briefly something about the process, because it's partially audible but not completely. So help us.
Yeah, so we had the full track, like not single tracks of the Hugh Masekela song. We had the full song, which often happens when you got a request to do a remix. You get some old song where they don't have the multi-tapes anymore. So we took the whole song and we looked for parts that we can use. And for me, of course, for Jazzanova, it is like a very natural thing to also use parts of the original. I know some remixers who do something like an atmospheric remix, more like a cover version, but we really wanted to have his vocals and the guitars and all the sounds of the song, and also the vocal choir that was audible at the beginning of the mix. So it's a lot about how to say, working with organic material that is already there, that is also not played on click or something. It's varying in tempo and intensity also. I think it is a very big challenge to bring all these organic aspects into electronic music while keeping it like suitable for the club, for instance. I mean, the song I played is not something like a primetime techno track or something. It's more building up maybe in the beginning or very late in the night, but I think it has a very nice mood on the dance floor, and that's what we want to keep. Have the original elements, add some own elements, and also change the whole, let's say, structure or dynamic of the song. In this case, we split it into a first part and a second part. That's where we stopped listening to it, and it got more, let's say, organic in the second part, but the beginning is like, let's say, like a slow techno track or something. And also we often bring in kind of a hip hop aesthetic by sampling, using the technique of sampling. And that's also how I got in contact with a lot of jazz records, actually, when I started working with in hip hop music in the 90s. Yeah, in this case, also we use a lot of own instruments. We had a prepared piano, like muting single strings, but using the pedal that the whole piano is kind of open. And when you know, like knock the string, it sounds like a echo chamber or something, or like a hall chamber. And that gives it a very, how to say, specific sound in that track. It sounds like a plucked, I don't know, string sound or something. It sounds organic, but we work with it in an electronic way. That's what I would say. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. That prepared piano mixed and then sequencing that, yeah, brings a different sort of timbre to the sample record.
Yeah.
I find that combination really intriguing with all of your production techniques. Well, I wish we could have a lot more time to explore the entire track and hear more about your process, but of course it's also described in the book. And I know you have your own shows that you talk more extensively about the production-led aesthetics of your recordings. So I would encourage everyone to check those out. And thanks a lot from Berlin for joining us today. Yes. Thank you so much, Stefan. All right. Now we have a final response to the book by Dr. Fabian Holt from Roskilde in Denmark. And he was nice enough to read the entire book by today. So he's going to just briefly respond to it with a couple of themes. We may not have so much time for discussion because, of course, we want to make sure we get on time to the second hour. So, Fabian, are you in the room?
Yeah, I hope you can hear me.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Good.
Great. Yes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for also to the musicians here who are participating. This is you're really bringing something really valuable to the table to all of us. Thank you so much. I want to thank Professor Kristin McGee for giving me this opportunity to respond to your book. It's a great privilege. I want to also briefly apologize to Chris Tinelli that I'm not going to discuss his book. I have fond memories of our trip to a karaoke bar in Kassel a few years ago in Kassel, Germany. I don't know if you remember that. That was fantastic. I also noted that my former colleague, Professor Sarah Strandved, who is now with Groningen University, is with us. Greetings to you, Sarah, and to other colleagues who I'm recognizing. I'm going to do three things. I'm going to say something about the history from which this book evolves and why it is so significant. And second, I want to detail the agenda of the book and conclude the third section with a few words about reading the main narratives of the book as an evolution in Kristin McGee's career from the 90s. So there's going to be a biographical dimension to the final section, Kristin. So I want to start by expressing my overwhelmingly positive response to reading the book. I read earlier versions of only a few chapters before, and reading the matured versions together and with the introduction was very fulfilling. The originality of your thinking becomes clearer and the bigger picture emerges. So it's a great achievement, and it's really wonderful to finally have this all come together. This book looks beyond, in the kindest possible way, the exhausted old boys club of jazz studies in which I grew up. I grew up in this culture in the 90s and was mentored by one of the patriarchs, if you will. He was very kind, though, and had a broad view, so I wouldn't be too reductive, but this was the culture. This was sort of this patriarchal tradition that you also describe in the book, sort of in terms of modernism. It was the main intellectual tradition. It was dominant. It was dominant throughout the 20th century, and it is therefore a central resource. for jazz scholarship today. It was also, and also I think to popular music studies today, it was not so homogeneous. It was not so homogeneous as one might think, and I think future studies can further explore this diversity and strengthen the historical grounding of new narratives. But it was indeed an exhausted culture. In my experience, I cannot speak for everyone, but in my experience, it was an exhausted culture, and I'm enthusiastically welcoming the pioneering agenda of Kristin McGee's book. It feels like a breath of fresh air, and it's a major contribution. So, what is the agenda? The book introduces a new agenda and convincingly demonstrates its intellectual relevance. Before describing it in detail, I want to recognize a few aspects that I think transcend any particular agenda. Above all, Kristin McGee is a creative and generous ethnographer who sees things other people don't see and has much empathy and kindness. Kristin is also a musician and dancer. She brings much insight into musicians' creative processes, and she writes effortlessly about dance. And I think that alone is a pioneering contribution to jazz studies. The book uncovers much interesting material because of your creative ethnography, ethnographic talent. It covers much interesting material, from urban remix collectives to a swing camp in Sweden, and beyond to vintage culture in France and Holland. These are relevant and original choices that transcend conventional boundaries between jazz and pop music studies. Now, the book represents a contemporary form of cultural studies, including critical gender studies. And this has generally been lacking in European jazz studies. The book's theoretical perspective represents a transformation of jazz discourse into something more intellectually vibrant and socially just. And the theory creates a compelling argument for broadening the field of inquiry. The value of the book is thus not limited to the data analyzed in the book. The broader perspective is that students, scholars, and general readers now have a highly relevant and more socially just account of contemporary jazz and contemporary musical life more generally, because this is not just a jazz book. And I was even wondering in a few places if this could have been framed as a contemporary music book or something. Although this is not a critique, I don't think it's a weakness. I also want to applaud the series editors this is really a wonderful series, not something that's easy to do. So big respect and admiration to series editors. Finally, so the third and final section here, or a point, is how this book evolved from your trajectories, or from narratives in your career, Kristin. Like the American star musicians that shaped European jazz culture, you have come to Europe. This is reflected in your journey is reflected in this book. Your dissertation, your musical work in Chicago, and your new home in Groningen, Holland. The chapters on remix collectives in bohemian neighborhoods of Amsterdam, Berlin and Oslo build on your experience as a musician in similar neighborhoods in Chicago in the late 90s and early 2000s. The chapters on the remarkable and influential swing camp in Sweden evolved from Kristin's dissertation on all-women jazz bands during World War II. The dissertation involved analysis of musicians in American cinema, and this was an important source of inspiration for the European swing dance revival. The final chapters on vintage culture draw from Kristin's experiences in Holland, which had a strong festival boom in the 2000s. Here, the book looks beyond the most popular festivals and creates a valuable narrative by including a smaller rural French festival that I'd never heard about before. And this narrative challenges the urbanism of popular music, or the urban-centric perspective of popular music and culture studies. And it introduces the interesting idea of festivals of smaller festivals and of jazz festivals as a technology of survival, a way of coping with large-scale economic and environmental crisis. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabian. I'm going to present your book now because that's how I meant to introduce you, and then I got sidetracked. So I'm just going to remove you from the screen quickly because I'd like everyone to see your fantastic cover of your new book that just came out that I already have purchased, but I have not yet read because it's so incredibly new. And your research has been so inspirational for our students. We've relied upon your genre theory for a decade. And so we're all excited to read Everybody Loves Live Music, A Theory of Performance Institutions, just out by the University of Chicago Press. So your scholarly prestige is reproduced in this book, and we look forward to reading. Thank you so much for your kind and generous words, Fabian. I think we have about 5 minutes for any kind of questions or responses to any of the performances or the book or to Fabian's talk. Just anything that came up. We still have about 5 minutes left in this hour if anybody would like to pose a question. And I think I'll stop presenting so that you can see each other.
Susanna,
Oh, yes,
please
Susanna,
do
that's
say a
right.
little bit
yes,
more.
Say something more. Yes, please do.
More. Yeah, well, I just wrote something that to me it's all about improvisation, and that's a very deep. It's a very deep rooted feeling for myself to what I am. So I don't. I'm right now. I'm really getting into producing. And so I started out as a jazz saxophone player, and then I also started DJing, and now I'm really into producing because that's the situation. We cannot perform or only like this in the living room. So you have to make something out of nothing, and yeah, improvising. I think that's the greatest thing about jazz and it's not only about the music notes, but it's really about the whole situation, to deal with things which come up and make something and reach out to people as like you reach out to the notes, so you think, okay, what's the next note? So that's the journey for me. So, and it will never stop. So I just wanted to say that.
That's a great note to end on. And thanks so much, Susanna, for your new creation that you created for this event. We feel so honored to have you. Thank you, Stefan, for explaining your incredible track to us. And thank you, Fabian, for your very generous and kind response to the book. So if there aren't any further questions, this might be a wonderful moment to just quickly transition to the second hour for Dr. Tinelli's book introduction. And I'm going to take over, hopefully, on the technical side. So I'll be typing things in the chats if you have questions. So thank you all so much for coming today for the book launch of Remixing European Jazz Culture. Great to see everybody here. We can clap for each other.